without further ado, I want to welcome up Margaret Treadwell with the McKenzie River Trust. We've been really lucky to share an office with Margaret since she was hired at MRT. I think the first couple months you were over in Eugene, but then you were with us.
No, I've never.
Okay, so it was all around 2020, and then there's something happened then, and I just forget everything.
I was still living in Astoria.
That's what it was. But she used to be up on the third floor of our building with us. She moved down to the first floor, but we still get to see her very often. And we like that because we love Margaret. And I'm going to stop talking and let Margaret talk about coastal conservation, a little bit of work that McKenzie River Trust does out here on the coast, even though McKenzie's in their name, and highlighting a really cool project in partnership with the Confederated tribes of Siletz Indians at Cape Foulweather. So please welcome Margaret.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here tonight. It's a really beautiful night here in Newport, so I appreciate everyone who's in this room. Yeah, and I'll try not to keep you here too long, but hopefully I can share some good information that you find a little inspiring and interesting and fun and something you might want to get involved in. So, I work for McKenzie River Trust, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And tonight I'm going to talk a bit about community conservation on the Central Coast. So mostly land acquisition, which is what land trusts do, with a focus on McKenzie River Trust, or MRT. I'm going to call it MRT a lot. Our work with partners, and including a 439-acre conservation easement right outside of Newport, and 2 land protection projects in collaboration with the Confederated tribes of Siletz Indians. So first, a little bit about McKenzie River Trust. We're a land trust based in Eugene, and our mission is to help people protect and care for the lands and rivers that they cherish in Western Oregon. And we do that through, primarily anyway, through acquiring land for conservation and working with willing landowners to place conservation easements on their properties. But in recent years, also, we've been increasingly working on with other nonprofits, governments, and other partners to help them acquire land for community conservation purposes. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about tonight is more in that realm. So for anyone who doesn't, we are nonprofits that work in communities to conserve habitat for wildlife and plants, for water quality and quantity, and ensuring the land is available for future generations. This can include places that provide equitable access to nature, protecting family farms. We do at MRT own a couple of farms, tackling climate change, building healthy communities, etc. So we actively work to permanently conserve land. In some cases, we acquire the land outright, and we also partner to conserve land that remains in the property of the willing landowners using the conservation easement. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Land trusts are like local, really small, or state or regional, like us, or even national and international in scope. So they serve about 93% of US counties, and they're in like urban, suburban, and rural communities. So ours is mostly about rural lands, but urban land trusts are also really interesting and cool. Land trusts can be all volunteer.
Is Fisher going forward?
No.
Okay, sorry.
Are you getting bored of this?
No. Thought you tried to click it. It didn't go.
Here we go.
There.
No, first one. So
Sorry.
here's the map. Evan's bored, so
I was I'll shut up.
So this is a map of all the land trusts in Oregon, and this was put together by the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, which is a coalition of Oregon land trusts. So they help us all with training and sometimes with pro bono legal work. And so we're a member, and they produce this beautiful map. So on the coast, we have McKenzie River Trust serving from about Siletz Bay Port. And north of us, we have the North Coast Land Conservancy from Siletz Bay North. And then we have Wild Rivers Land Trust in the south from Reedsport South. But then we have a few others who also work in our area, like View the Future focuses on the Yachats area. Big fans of them. The Nature Conservancy in Oregon does a lot of work, and have done a lot of work on the coast, mostly like I found them very supportive and like helping me think of ways to make projects work. So they're a really important partner. The Wetlands Conservancy, many of you know, they own a lot of property on the central coast as well, but they also own property in Nevada. So they work statewide. And then we have the Conservation Fund, who played a part in one of the projects I'm going to talk about tonight, and also helps out with various projects in the state, and then also Western Rivers Conservancy, and there are more. So there are, it's not just us, but we like to think of ourselves as your local land trust. So that's what this slide is about. So MRT was founded in 1989 by volunteers with a focus on preserving the McKenzie River watershed, which is the water source for Eugene and Springfield. But we've expanded way beyond that scope, and a long time ago. So even 25 years ago, we were working outside of the McKenzie. So we've protected, I feel disingenuous saying we because I wasn't there, but MRT has protected over 10,000 acres in Lincoln, Lane, and Douglas counties, which is where we work. And over 2,000 acres of that is on the central coast, and I was there for a lot of that, so that was cool. We have over 500 volunteers annually, and we're supported by over 1,500 individuals and families through donations of all sizes. And we opened our coast office in Newport in 2021, and I was lucky enough to be hired to be the Coastal Conservation Program Manager. So the reason we do this is because healthy rivers sustain the vibrancy of our region. So it ties into our own health and well-being and also our economy, because all these things are connected, right? Healthy salmon runs, a healthy ocean for Dungeness crab, conserving land and having healthy landscapes on land make those, at least support having those things happen. Tourism, a natural landscape that draws tourism is very important to us economically, and then also for our own happiness and reason for being here. Conservation also helps buffer communities against extreme weather, for example, by absorbing floodwaters. Watershed conservation helps ensure reliable water supply for our coastal communities, which is becoming more of a concern. And then improving fish passage and reconnecting floodplains bolsters salmon populations and other fish as well. McKenzie River Trust also does restoration. So this is a property, this is a good example. This is a big project we're working on right now. This is a property just upriver from Florence on the Siletz River near Cushman, if you know that area. It's called Haijik Tatu, and it was formerly called Wait Ranch, and that was the name given to it by the Confederated tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, and it means heart of the river. And MRT has owned this property since 2010, and we're currently doing the restoration. And you might be like, why did it take 15 years? But that's another story for another presentation. Let's just say it's complicated. But this is a former cattle ranch that was diked and drained about 100 years ago. And we're currently in the process of restoring about 217 acres of tidal wetland. So you can see this was like partway done, some of the tidal channels there, those were all actually excavated by large machinery. And then some water's gotten back in there. But this was, I think, the first year of implementation. So it's changed a little bit since then. This is a map of our service area with our coastal projects highlighted. So of these, we've completed 2 fee titles or ownership of salamander property, which is down between Florence and Reedsport off of Taconich Lake. And we also have some local conservation easements. In addition to the Yacona Nature Preserve, we have another one at Parker Slough. on the Uquina, and that was originally a Central Coastline Conservancy. And we're working on transferring 2 more and just building up kind of that portfolio in the Newport area. I need some water before I talk. About conservation easements. The study that's into in detail because a lot of people don't understand what conservation easements are. And it's a good opportunity to explain. Our internet connection is unstable, it says. It's okay, we can handle that here. Okay. So a conservation easement is a flexible legal tool that conserves land while leaving it in private ownership. So it's a legal agreement between a landowner and a qualified conservation organization like MRT or any of those other land trusts that I mentioned, or a government agency. For example, Natural Resources Conservation Service holds some easements. Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board holds easements. And it permanently limits a property's uses in order to conserve its conservation values. So what this picture is trying to convey is that when you own land, you also own many rights associated with that land. So that might be rights to harvest timber, to build structures, to grow crops, and so on, subject, of course, to zoning and other restrictions. And when you donate or sell a conservation easement to a land trust or a government agency, you're permanently giving up some of those rights. You are in sort of future owners of your property. For example, you might give up the right to build additional residences, the right to subdivide a property. You might give up the right to certain kinds of timber practices or all timber harvesting other than anything like sustainable for the health of the forest, things like that. They're written out in a detailed legal agreement that outlines all the rights and restrictions. And then the holder has the responsibility of coming at least once a year and making sure that the landowner is complying with those restrictions. The advantages of this, you're like, why would anyone do this? The advantages are that it leaves the property in the ownership of the landowner. So you can continue to live on it, sell it, pass it on to your heirs. It can significantly lower estate taxes. So sometimes that makes passing on your property to an heir feasible where it otherwise would not be. And there's often property tax benefits as well. And they're flexible, so they can be written to kind of meet the needs of the property. So it's not a one-size-fits-all type situation. So we had to get back to beautiful pictures. This is important. The biggest conservation easement that I've worked on for sure is the one at Yacona Nature Preserve and Learning Center. So probably a lot of you are familiar with this place, but it's just outside of Newport on the south side of the Uquina estuary with a spruce forest and hiking trails and viewpoints onto Uquina Bay. It's also a living laboratory and education center. They have a high school class that I think it's a environmental studies class that goes out and does long-term projects. They have other grades that come out. They've got basically a whole education program going on, which is really amazing. And so the founders of Yacona Nature Preserve, Bill and Joanne Barton, they wanted to be sure that the land would not ever be used for things that they don't want it to be used for. They wanted it to be conserved in its natural state in perpetuity after they're no longer here. So they turned to MRT to make that happen with a conservation easement on their property. And so it's 439 acres. It protects the property in perpetuity. And I think it's a really great gift to our area. So it's pretty amazing. Very happy to have had the chance to work on that. So a few other things we've done. So land trusts can work, as I've mentioned a couple times already, in partnership with communities, local governments, and tribes. And there's kind of a few different ways we can do that. Being a partner assistant, so that means working on real estate transactions, due diligence, and grant writing. Especially the due diligence and the real estate part of things is very wonky, so it can be helpful to have our staff, particularly our staff in Eugene, helping folks out with that because there's a lot of expertise there. We've also acted as a bridge owner, so holding a property in the interest of a future owner, which is what we did with Cape Foulweather. and holding conservation easements at the request of like a community, maybe to protect the watershed or some other community goal. Drinking water protection has been a big effort and initiative in this area and on the coast in general. It has been one of our focuses since we started our coast program at MRT. We participated in the workshops that were put on through the Department of Environmental Quality, the Coastal Drinking Source Water Protection Workshop Series. And that brought together people and agencies and so the people, sorry, everyone's people, but citizens, concerned citizens, water districts and others, so that everyone kind of knows each other and is connected to some of the same grant sources and can get familiar with each other's issues. And that has been a really powerful way to kind of bring land trusts into that conversation. So I don't know that it had really happened too much before, but they brought us in as a kind of, we could provide the partner assist aspect of things. So as I mentioned before, all the real estate transaction stuff is very wonky and it's really helpful. It's even worse than buying a house. So so we have basically offered our services to cities and water districts to help them purchase their drinking watersheds. And as you know, if you keep a forest intact in a watershed, it kind of acts as a natural reservoir, which is what a lot of communities are hoping to do when that is an option. So we have, I've been on the technical advisory committees of the drinking water protection plans. I was trying to remember what the acronym was for Lincoln City and for Newport. And so those are not really like being operationalized yet, but they're getting there. And you'll probably see some action happening soon with those watersheds. And I think that's really exciting to have the city actually own the watershed and be able to manage it. We're also members of, oops, there's a typo. We're also members of the everyone's favorite acronym, the OCCEC, the Oregon Central Coast Estuary Collaborative. Sorry about that. Which is a network of estuary conservation and restoration practitioners collaborating to improve the health and resilience of estuaries on Oregon's Central Coast. And I actually had this in a later slide, but now I just want to say that the estuaries on Oregon's coast are like superstar wetlands. They're very biologically productive and they sequester a lot of carbon and they really deserve the attention that we're giving them. So the OCCEC was initially founded by 8 nonprofits and watershed councils who constitute the core group now. But it also welcomes others who are who want to constructively engage in estuary conservation and restoration with specific projects, but also more broadly. And we have over 70 individuals and 40 organizations engaged at this time, which is pretty amazing. And what's the geographic scope of the OCCEC? It's a big area. So the OCCEC successfully applied for and got a focused investment partnership grant from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board in 2022. It's called Restoring Resilience in 2 Estuaries. And through this initiative, an anticipated $7.8 million will be used to conserve and restore tidal wetland habitats across 25 ranked projects in the Yaquina and Alsea estuaries over a 6 to 10 year period. So this is a lot of ongoing restoration funding and conservation, technical, not just restoration. So MRT is a member of the core team on the 5th, and it's governed by the core team. Sorry, I'm looking at these notes and messing them all up anyway. Okay. Now get to the part that I know better. MidCoast Watersheds Council manages the bid on behalf of the partnership and does an awesome job. We're very grateful. And has obtained 2 engagement grants 4 technical assistant grants, a restoration grant, and a monitoring grant through the FIP. And each spring and fall, we apply for specific grants under the FIP initiative with projects happening year round. So the money is already sort of allocated, but then we apply under that umbrella for the specific projects. So this year, I mean, what it really enables is like these ongoing interconnected projects in a focused area, which is really beneficial and great. And we're really lucky to have it. And we're one of, is it 2 FIPs on the coast or 3 now?
3, the Coos, Siletz.
Right, of course, Coos, yeah. So Coos, Siletz, and ours, they all started at the same time, right? Yeah, so it's been a really good boon for the coast through OWEB. So this year, we're hoping to submit the first acquisition grant under the FIP, which is for protecting, conserving, and eventually restoring tidal wetlands on the Yaquina estuary. So the FIP includes 3 project types. The first is focused on restoring tidal marsh. That's represented by the photo on the left, and it's made up of emergent vegetation found above mudflats, but still within range of the tides. The second FIP project type is focused on protecting and restoring tidal swamps, including scrub, shrub, or forested habitats, and that's represented by the center and right photos here. These have been more than 90% lost in Oregon's estuaries, and they are superstars. They provide important habitat for coho and salmon, and support a host of fish, wildlife, and bird species. And they also provide a suite of ecosystem services. So filtering pollutants, providing floodwater storage, buffering the coast from erosion and storm surge, and carbon sequestration. So simply by existing, these habitats remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and store them in tidal wetland soils and plant material. Superstars. So the last project type in the FIP seeks to protect, restore, and prepare areas projected to be inundated by sea level rise with the migration of tidal wetland habitats. So as the sea level rises, the wetlands are going to move a bit. And we call those landward migration zones, and we're working to plan ahead to maintain the benefits of those ecosystems as they move. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about those 2 projects, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. So how it happened that MRT came to have this relationship with the Siletz tribe. So back in like 2010, so again, 15 years ago, our staff have been working on in collaborative natural resources partnerships in the Willamette Valley, actually, and a funding program that requires tribal consultation on restoration projects over in the valley. And through that, our staff struck up a professional friendship with Stan Van de Wettering, who's in this picture here, who is the biological programs manager at the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians in their natural resources office. And this was like really just a staff level camaraderie, talking about the challenges of this kind of work, kind of a friendship. For example, one time when one of our tide caterers were doing the restoration, the staff from the Natural Resources Department from the Siletz tribe came out and helped us because we didn't have the correct equipment with us to fix that. So it was really like that kind of a hopeful friendship. But then in 2016, the tribe through asked us to help them buy a property, which is now called the Salamander property and is down on Taconich Lake. And so what they asked us to do was to purchase the property and write an OWEB grant application to pay for the purchase price and then transfer the property to the tribe. So this was like how our partnership became more consistent and actually moved into this acquisition space. And as a result of that, we also established a memorandum of understanding with the tribe in 2017 that is focused on partnering on land conservation, enhancement, restoration, and tribal cultural preservation projects. So this is the project that we completed late last year. This is the Cape Foulweather project, and this is the view of the property from Devil's Punch Bowl. So if everyone probably knows where that is. So Cape Foulweather was named by Captain Cook on his voyage to the North Pacific in 1778. But of course, it was already known to the indigenous people of the Oregon coast since time immemorial. I'm sure we've all driven over, thought that maybe they gave it a good name. I find sometimes it's beautiful, but also like when there's those storms on the coast, when you get to that point and you're driving over that headland, you're like, yeah, foul weather, you know, it's always just like a little bit worse. So this property is about 27 acres. It's this meadow that you see sloping down, and then also the forest on the what is that, the right side of the picture. So between that big rocky bluff. So this property was was for sale. It was on the open market. It was actually zoned residential, if you can believe it. It was developable theoretically, and there'd actually been some plans drawn up in the past to put as many as like 16 or 20 houses up there. It's really hard to imagine. And if you stand out there, it's just kind of like, but anyway. So went on the market in March 2021, which was before I actually started my job. And a group of conservation folks, you know, many of whom you all know, were talking about it and thinking like, how do we protect this from being bought by a developer, right? And so Stan, others from the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, folks from the Lincoln County Planning Department, Paul Engelmeyer from the MidCoast Watersheds Council Board, and the Nature Conservancy. We're all meeting, just trying to figure out how do we put together a deal to conserve this. The asking price was $1.78 million. Also, just to put it in perspective. So they have been working for a few months on coming up with a plan to conserve it, and then they asked if MRT would be interested in getting involved. They kind of described it as a last untouched part of the coast. And so we said yes. So this, I don't know quite where that property is. So it's just, if you're at that overlook, which is the next slide. If you're at the overlook with the little house with the telescope looking out in the ocean, it's just to the south of there. And this is kind of the view of here, like right here in the foreground, and then sweeping down the coast there. So the property had like obvious ecological significance, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but we also learned that it had cultural significance that we learned about from the tribe. So we learned from the tribe that what is now the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians includes 28 bands of people historically located across Western Oregon, whose members were forced into 1.1 million acre coast reservation by the US government during the mid-1800s. And even though that reservation was pretty large for its time in history, think about those bands placed there previously lived on and managed the entirety of Western Oregon. So it's a great contraction of space and a lot of moving. And then most of that reservation land was taken by the federal government by 1900. So we learned that in the late 1800s, parcels of land called allotments were assigned to individual tribal members. So this image here is part of a map of these allotments. So numbers 4S and 5S, I don't know if you can see. Those include the property at Cape Foulweather that I'm talking about, but they're much bigger than that. And those belonged to members of the tribe, along with all the rest of these. And these allotments to tribal members were lost in approximately the 1930s. And there's a lot more information available about that elsewhere. So ownership of this property at Cape Foulweather, it offered the first opportunity for the tribe to actually own oceanfront property since those allotments were extinguished. And it provides access for tribal elders and other tribal members to gather plants and animals that are important to their culture, lifeways, and sustenance. And then perhaps even more important, that rocky intertidal area, because it does have a rocky intertidal part of the property, offers the opportunity to pass on knowledge about and collect many intertidal species that are culturally important as well, including sea anemones and seaweeds and much more. So about the ecological significance, there are about 11 acres of Sitka spruce forest and a little bit of alder shore pine mix. And then there's about 14 acres of salt spray meadow. So let's see if this works. Yes, animation. The intact, undisturbed salt spray meadow is pretty rare and important habitat. It's largely been lost to development. It's notable because it's potential habitat for the federally threatened Oregon silver spot butterfly, which is this guy here. Specifically, the obligate host plant for its larval form, the early blue violet, can grow in this environment. So it's very important to conserve. There are 5 known remaining populations of the butterfly, and 4 of those are on the Oregon coast, the central Oregon coast. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Lincoln Soil and Water Conservation District are working on habitat reintroduction and habitat restoration and reintroduction of the butterfly in Lincoln County, and that also includes a backyard habitat program. So if you have a backyard and you want to make it friendly for these guys, you know who to talk to. It's all, and the property itself is also a possible site for habitation and reintroduction. And then my favorites, harbor seals. The rocky intertidal zone is relatively secluded, so it's pretty hard to get there. Your average beachgoer is not going to end up here. So it's a really nice, quiet resting place for harbor seals. And those are an Oregon conservation strategy species. And then the Sitka spruce forest is potential habitat for marbled murrelet. We also felt that was important to conserve. And there are many native forest plants, like some of our favorites, salal, huckleberry, salmonberry. And then it also includes 2 sea stacks, which are important for seabirds. So how did this project work? A lot of people, it had a lot of steps, and it's confusing to people, but basically what we did was, at the request of the Siletz tribe, they said, we're interested in owning this land, but we can't buy it right now on the open market for $1.78 million. But we, as McKenzie River Trust, they asked us, can you buy it? And so we bought it using a loan. So we bought a loan from Craft 3, and we bought the property. So we negotiated with the landowner who really wanted top dollar. We negotiated with him, got the loan, and bought the property and held and managed it for 2 years. Luckily, it wasn't too hard to manage, but and it was sort of a pleasure to be able to go out there every now and again as well. And while we held and managed the property, we worked with the staff at the Siletz tribe to secure acquisition funding from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, you maybe heard a little bit about lately, through Oregon's Coastal Zone Management Program, which is managed by Oregon's Department of Land Conservation and Development. So we were awarded that funding, which is great. And after about 18 months of bureaucratic hurdles and getting all the paperwork done and approved, the funds were released to the tribe, and the tribe bought the property from McKenzie River Trust back in October. So they own it now. And their plans, I believe, are to develop a few trails in the parking area so that they can bring groups out there. And this was bipartisan infrastructure law funding from the Biden era, from 2021. The last project I'm going to talk about is one that's currently in progress. So this is a 313 acre property in Boonwood Slough. So Boonwood Slough, which is this lowland loop here off of the Yaquina River. It's an old meander expo of the Yaquina River, and I've heard that geologists think that the main stem of the river used this meander and moved to its current route after the 1700 Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, and Evan is nodding. So I am
heard that true.
no doubt.
Heard that.
Okay, so does everyone know where we are here? That's just the beginnings of Newport over here on the left. Like Hatfield Marine Science Center's there. Yaquina Nature Preserve is that big sort of semi-Michigan look. Okay, back to the presentation. Okay, so this area was, as so many places where it was diked and drained for agriculture, including cattle grazing, in the 1930s, 40s, using federal funding, as new agriculture opportunities were promoted by the government following the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. So this property, and you'll see in a second how much of it MRT actually owns right now, but the property has been part of a drainage district for over 75 years. And so natural tidal inundation flow is impeded by older traditional tide gates. So there's one at the end of Boone Slough, which is the one on the right, the one on the left, the western one. And then there's also another tide gate on the other side on Newt Slough. So this is the map with the property that's, this was purchased from a ranching family, and the home site was partitioned off and sold separately. And that was land use work that was done by the Conservation Fund. So that's another kind of service that Land Trust can provide if you're working on a conservation project with them, and that stuff can be pretty complicated and not fun. So that's something to consider. So we currently own this, but the plan, and we have a purchase and sale agreement to transfer it to the Siletz tribe when the funding is available. So it's currently managed by the Siletz tribe, an official agreement between us that codifies that management. So what lives out there? What is the cultural and ecological significance? So currently, this has been called Chinook Onit, the Chinook and Salmon Clam Place, I'm told is what that means. And this is situated in a brackish slough network. So those tide gates are leaky. You know, some salt water does get up in there. And so it has open water, historical channels, emergent wetlands, and wet meadows. It has a rich native plant community, and it provides critical nesting, foraging, and overwintering habitat for 160 resident and migratory bird species that use the Pacific Flyway. So if you're a birder and you haven't been out here, you need to get out there. And also anadromous cutthroat trout, that's hard to say, and coho salmon. And it's located within that broader Boone Slough complex, like that whole circle, which receives freshwater inputs from 9 streams, flowing from over 2,300 acres of upland coastal forests. So it has that deep channel slough habitat, historical tidal channel habitat, emergent wetland habitat, that has the emergent tidal wetland habitat is about 198 acres. And it has native Russian sedge emergent wetland. And then the wet meadow habitat is currently dominated by European pasture grasses, unfortunately, but it's 72 acres of that. But they provide They support culturally important, which is waterfowl, salmon, elk, and deer, and I think I've got some pictures, yes. All taken by Tim Laws, who works for the tribe. And so conserving this area will enhance connectivity between the Aquina River estuary and those adjacent acres of upland forest, and provide a habitat anchor for the area. How do I get that? All right. Okay, got it. Thank you. So this area has been kind of on the lot of the tidal wetlands that are cut off from the Aquina River. So it was pretty exciting to get part of it in conservation ownership. And we're trying to do the same thing with this property that's a couple of weeks, whether we're selected for funding, but even if it's selected for funding, we're not sure if the funding is going to come through. But that's the current avenue that we're going down to try and conserve this property and get it transferred over to the Siletz tribe. And if that doesn't come through, we have other ideas. So there are other grants, there are state funds, and other federal funds. So it will happen. It's just a matter of when. So to wrap up, I just wanted to Chinook Ona Ilahi or Boondooslu provides an opportunity to restore estuary wetlands and reconnect to the river. So estuaries and their surrounding wetlands are those buffer zones, stabilize shorelines, protect coastal areas and inland habitats and human communities from floods and storm surges. And when the flooding does occur, they act like huge sponges soaking up that excess water. They protect streams, river channels, and coastal shores from excessive erosion. But Boondooslu does not currently include true estuary wetlands because it is disconnected from the estuary by a levee and tide gates. In the near term, the plan for this site is to restore some native vegetation to the current. This will benefit the existing wildlife populations that currently use the property, especially local and migratory bird species. But in the longer term, full tidal reconnection, it will hopefully be possible and would provide the ecosystem services listed here and this beautiful graphic from our friends in Canada. So this is from the Canadian government. It was the best depiction I could find. So that's the end of what is not really a story, but kind of a report on what's going on. I would just close with, if you think that this kind of work is important, and you're able to support it personally, these are a few ways that a person can support MRT. You can become a member by any size of contribution. You can join our mailing list, which would be great. If you want to get on it, let me know. You can volunteer. We actually don't have much volunteering in this area. So for now, I would say volunteer with the Watershed Council. Keep you posted about when we have volunteer stuff. Join us for a tour special event. We actually do it here, but we're increasing that. And then some of the ones in the valley are actually pretty cool. I prefer the coast, but I went over for an event to go see beaver at dusk at one of our properties near Eugene, and it was really cool and fun. So if you want to venture over there, I encourage you to go on one of our tours because they're pretty fun. And just help like spread the word about what we're doing, that we're here. And then I also just want to encourage people to contact their legislators who are working on a dozen or more bills related to place-based planning and water project support and environmental things. The drinking water protection important to you. They always need those reminders. It should be obvious, but they need to hear it. And this is me. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. You want to call or email?
Questions in the room?
So Margaret, you were talking about Cape Foulweather, very interesting that Tribe is thinking of putting in a parking lot with trails, and I just don't see.
It's just like a little area to bring like small, like vans of people so that they can park on the property. But it's just like right by the road.
Okay,
Sorry, for people at home, it was a question about parking at Cape Foulweather.
it seems like you just simply use one of the pullouts there, it's.
So the only actual access to that property, create a small parking area so that vehicles aren't being parked in the community, but rather just over the line on their property. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it gonna only be open to tribal members or general public?
So for people at home or everybody, the question is whether Cape Foulweather will only be open to tribal members or to the public. It's really hard to access, like I just described. So it's generally only open to tribal members unless guided. So I'm not sure how long it's going to take, but the intention is to have some public access, like facilitated, so like planned events. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Margaret,